I almost forgot to do my intro and outro for this particular video, but nonetheless, it's Joshua Vergara from Android Authority. What's going on, everybody? And every photo and video that you're seeing in this camera shootout was taken on the cameras of the LG G Flex 2. Why don't we get a couple of the modes out of the way? After all, there are very few. Here's a look at the HDR that does lighten up the darks quite a bit and adds a little bit of color saturation to the photos, but it's not that pronounced of an effect. The Panorama mode does stitch together the photos quite nicely, but I did not have any moving subjects in the still photo, so we will probably see some stitching if there was. But let's go ahead and get into some outdoor shots here. You can see here that the color saturation is actually quite nice, and if we go into the 100 crops there, we do have a good level of detail despite a little bit of smudging in the smoothness around those details, but nonetheless the photos do look quite nice. They do have the right color reproduction with a little bit of saturation, not a very high amount as I'm usually used to from other competitors in the market today, but nonetheless, as you can see in the 100 crops, we are getting a nice amount of detail nonetheless. You will see later that this amount of detail does happen to go down a little bit, which is a bit of a bummer, but we're going to get into that in a little bit. After these next couple of photos, I did want to talk to you about the laser guided autofocus. It is a wonderful feature to have on the LG G Flex 2 and the flagship G lines, but what I will say is that because you have to pinpoint the focus point, you might have a bit of trouble tracking your subject. If you have a small or thin object inside of your photos, you're going to see that there are some problems keeping it in focus as you are continuously trying to tap on the screen just to be able to get it. And you can see that effect happening here, especially when I'm trying to finally focus the shot. But of course, the other benefit of this camera is the OIS Plus, which helps with video just as much as it does with photo. You will have steadier shots, especially if you put a little bit of effort into steadying your hands, and it will compensate for what's left in your shakiness for a video or a photo. Oh boy, it's some Mega Mans. Now here, unfortunately, is where we start to see some changes. The indoor shots here are going to show you how the detail does get lost as you lower the amount of light that is in your shot. These pictures of Mega Man, as I go into the 100 crops on his face, make it clear that despite there being a lot of detail in the contours of Mega Man's face there, they just happen to be a little bit blurred out, or too smoothed out is the term that we're looking for here. I'm taking more shots indoors, and you can also see that the color saturation is starting to go down a little bit, especially when you have multiple exposures in one shot. Let's say a harsh lighting coming from the left side or the right side, whereas everything else is a little bit darker because we're indoors. You'll see that the camera has a little bit of a harder time trying to get the correct exposure and color reproduction. It's a bit of a bummer, and coupled with the loss of detail in the sharpness, we have some problems with the camera already in this particular situation, and it will only get worse when you get into much lower lighted situations. You can already see in this low light video just how much the details get fuzzy, and this is true for both photo and video. In these indoor shots, we do see quite a bit of a change from the outdoor shots in terms of pretty much everywhere in terms of these photos and their quality. And in these videos, the only thing I can really say is really great about these indoor videos is the OIS Plus helping with my shakiness. Speaking of shakiness, I was trying to get a good picture of Ichi the dog right here, and despite my pressing on the viewfinder to make the laser guided autofocus really try to pinpoint the subject, unfortunately he was moving around so much that I wasn't able to really get a good shot off. In the end, I had to just pick up the little guy myself and try to get a shot that way. But luckily he was able to stand still for a second, and I was able to get a very nice looking shot here with some actually pretty good detail, especially in his snout there. Especially if you're dealing with the minimalized user interface on the G Flex 2's camera, we're pretty much dealing with a simple camera experience here. You just have to tap on the screen in order to get the laser guided autofocus to focus, and then you get your shot right away. It's a very fast camera to use, and it's something that I really enjoy. So what we're focusing on here are the low light capabilities or the indoor capabilities, whereas the outdoor capabilities were actually quite nice. But now we're seeing a lot of smudges around the details, and unfortunately it's a bit of a bummer to see that this is the case with the G Flex 2's camera. I did want to take just a couple of selfies here, and I am going to go away from the G Flex 2's camera just to show you the effect that is available here. When you take a selfie with this particular camera, you can just move your hand downward in a very natural curved motion, and you'll be able to take a look at your self-portraits right away. It's a nice feature to have, and it allows you to take a look at the front-facing camera capabilities, which actually are still pretty standard. As always, thank you guys very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this camera shootout for the LG G Flex 2. It is an iteration that comes from the original G3 that now comes with the laser-guided autofocus and OIS+. Both are things that make this camera one of the easiest to use out there, and you are able to get some really good shots off from it. But unfortunately, the quality can be somewhat uneven, as you saw in my indoor lighting shots even. We already saw some loss in the detail and a lowered color saturation, so you might not be able to get a great shot off every single time, but I do still think that this camera is one of my favorites to use, mostly because of its ease of handling and its speed. But nonetheless, keep it tuned to Android Authority for all of the best coverage. Don't forget to stay tuned here for my full review of the LG G Flex 2. As you can see back there, it is under construction and will be available very soon. And don't forget to drop us some likes on our videos. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't already so you can check all of the great content from my colleagues in Android. And remember, after you're done with all of that, check out our other outlets, find us on social media, talk about Android in our forums, and listen to our Friday Debate podcast, on which today we already released another episode. So keep it tuned here for all of that, and remember to head on over to AndroidAuthority.com when you're done with all of that, because we are your source for all things Android.